I'd like to back up a little and look at the historical background of the Israelite monarchy in which the Yahwist writers emerged. So if we go back to around the year 1200, we can see a decline in the Egyptian-dominated Canaanite city-states. It seems around this time the city life was offering people less than it was worth. In other words, the cost of living in or around the city, which would include a heavy taxation, oppression. Some of these people were slaves that we'll see leaving the cities at this time. Anyway, people started leaving. Sometimes they revolted. Sometimes we saw evidence of slave revolts. And they would actually maybe destroy the city on their way out. But a lot of other people just left. They just, instead of, farming around the city and selling their goods in the city, they said, well, let's just go up here and take our chances in the hills. Now, again, what did the city give you? Safety, security to some extent. But apparently this was not enough, or was not worth it anymore. So people started leaving and abandoning the city-states. So you had these peasant farmers and revolting slaves go up into the pioneer country in Canaan, go up into the northern hills, and just start farming kind of on their own in a pioneer style, similar to what we saw here in the European immigration in the 18th and 19th centuries in the United States. Okay, so while they're up there farming, they, of course, kind of had left the way of the Canaanite city-states. They didn't like that society, and they were kind of forming their own society. It seems like they were joined by a group who had escaped from slavery in Egypt. And this group shared their faith in a God who freed the slaves and cares about the poor and oppressed people like them. A God who cares about the little guy, so to speak. Right? And that God's name was Yahweh, I am. Right, so there's evidence to support the idea that there actually was a group of escaped slaves that actually came from Egypt. Right? Some scholars say, well, wait a minute, the whole idea of the Israel exodus, the exodus from Egypt, that there were slaves that were freed by God in Egypt, that's just a metaphor for these slaves finding their freedom or being freed by God in Canaan, because you didn't have to live in Egypt to be oppressed by the Egyptians. The Egyptian royalty dominated these Canaanite city-states too. But there does seem to be evidence showing that they actually were, the Israelites, some of the early Israelites actually did escape slavery in Egypt, akin to the story of Exodus that we'll look at later in this course. That evidence includes the name of God, Yahweh, which is similar to one of the Midianite tribes' names for God, and also the fact that you had these pioneers, these Canaanite defectors and revolting slaves, runaway slaves, and peasant farmers farming in the hills. At some point, they stop eating pork. As archaeologists were going through the going through the trash of these cultures and societies, which is the way that we learn a lot about ancient societies through archaeology. All of a sudden, it seemed like people stopped eating pig. Now, why would you stop eating pig if you lived in a mountain farming community? Well, maybe you were influenced by the culture of a desert society. Right? In the desert, desert societies, desert cultures don't eat pork. Pork doesn't travel well in heat. If you eat pork in the desert, you often get trichinosis and die. And so there's some evidence that there actually was a group that came in from the desert, like it describes in the book of Exodus and Judges and Numbers. Anyway, so this group comes in. They share their faith in this God who cares for the poor and the oppressed with these other fringe groups living in the Northern Hill Country. And then they become part of a culture. This gives them a meaning and a purpose. Now they have a God that cares about someone like them. A lot different from the gods of the Canaanite city-states, and we'll see, as we already saw, the gods of the Babylonians, that didn't really care so much about the average everyday person. They might have cared about the kings, but the other people were kind of created to be slaves of the gods and therefore the kings. So they have this belief, and they start to share with other people living in Canaan, including herders and marauders, and they eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. As people adopt this culture, as people adopt this identity, as people share this vision of the world and a God who cares for the poor and the oppressed, a God who cares for the little guy, not just the king. So this is where Burge is going to pick it up with the transition of the Israelite culture from confederacy to monarchy. So after about 200 years of this kind of loose tribal affiliation, mostly rural based with the judges, these were tribal leaders who rallied the other tribes to help them in times when the Israelites might have been invaded by non-Israelite tribes. Anyway, you see this shift here to a monarchy with an urban center around the year 1000. So the house of David is established in the capital city of Jerusalem. Now you have a major shift in society here, a major shift in culture. You're going from this rural agrarian or herding society towards a more urban agrarian society. Right? So you're getting things like specialized labor. Right now you have a city, people are dividing jobs. Not everyone is farming all day, right? Not everyone is out all day herding the animals in this semi-arid environment. People have time to do other things, leisure time, and you also have people sharing labor. One person is going to work on building the houses in the city and the walls of the city and the various architecture and things that they need. Someone else is going to work maybe on water distribution. Other people are going to be merchants, trading things, right? You get these different jobs for different people. Not everybody is just going to be farming and herding anymore. So with that, you also get a literate class, or the scribes in this case. This is around the time, around 1000, where we see an Israelite alphabet emerge in historical artifacts. And what you end up having then is the king, in this case David, is going to start a school of scribes. He's going to employ people who know how to write a history of kings. So these scribes are going to write about the royal family, and they're going to use the oral tradition. They're going to use stories that have been passed on from the various tribes. But not just the stories from the Israelite tribes. They're also going to go to stories from neighboring societies to help build this picture and this history of the royal family. So that's where we get the Yahwist writers. The Yahwist writers are a school of professional scribes in the royal courts of Judah and Israel, going back as far as 1000 BC. Again, what's their purpose? Why are they writing? Well, as Burge says, they want to lionize the royal family. They're trying to show people, hey, this is a legit monarchy. You should listen to them and support them. They're also maybe chastising the people, showing the people, hey, this is where you've gone wrong. Come on, we need to do this better. They also are going to answer questions, just like we look at with the priestly writers during the exile. They're going to answer questions about meaning, identity, and purpose. And I remember this was a time around 1000 BC where there's this big changes going on, right? the Israelite culture, the Israelite societies are going from rogue pioneers to urbanized subjects, right? They're going from people who forged their identity by escaping the tyranny of the kings to people who are now going to be supporting a king. It's a big shift, and these writers are going to supply meaning, identity, and purpose in that time of transition.